what is the cost of great expectations? Well, according to that simple formula and according to this ancient philosophy, cost of great expectations, cost of that is our happiness. All right. Said on this podcast before that this quote that Swami will use quite often. I love this quote of, to expect the worst is pessimism. To be prepared for the worst is to be a philosopher. That is philosophy. To be prepared for the worst. This touches on this area code of expectations, but there's another way of looking at the problem with expectations. I'll mention one from the world and one from this philosophical tradition. One from the world that I love, this comes from Tim Ferriss is who I first heard this from, but I'm not sure if he got it from someone else. But he said, happiness is experience minus expectation. So if you have a great experience and you had low expectations or moderate or non-existent expectations, that lunch with a friend at that place you had never heard of before blows you away, that's happiness. Your experience supersedes your expectations. Unhappiness would be that deficit where your expectations exceed your experience and you end up with a negative. Happiness is experience minus expectations. So if your expectations are higher than the experience, get those tickets to the big game. You can't wait. You're anticipating it. You paid a little bit extra and your seats are behind some huge pillar at the baseball game. You can barely see, or it's raining. You end up with a debt, a negative. You end up with negative happiness because the expectations did not match. They overmatched the experience. So, in that equation, our expectations ought to be less than the experiences we have. In a great way, now we get into the philosophy of this, a great way to make sure your experience always supersedes your expectations. You guessed it, it is to not have any. This philosophy is all about action. The practical side, the day-to-day practical living side of this philosophy is action, action, action. I think I've said it before that it's like 97% of this philosophy can be summed up with action, action, action. That's the practical 97% of this philosophy because it is so damn practical in our day-to-day lives. The 3% that is the abstract, that points to the absolute highest, that 3% can also be summed up in 3 words of that thou art. Tattvam asi, the great phrase. Tattvam asi, that thou art, you are it. But if that is so high-minded, it's so high-level and abstract that is something that requires, well, and it does. I don't know if there's anyone that has heard that and it just clicked. If that requires a whole lot of reflection, like it does for essentially everyone, and there are, don't get me wrong, there are so many beautiful connection points between these two. 97% of action, 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 and the 3%, the abstract of tattvam asi. But these two sides of this philosophy, they are so clarifying on what to do. Definitely think about the absolute as often as one can. And in the midst of getting distracted, when you can't, when you've got things pulling at your attention, act, act, act. Action, action, action. This philosophy says quite clearly that we should never renounce our actions. This philosophy, contrary to popular opinion, is not about just going up to the Himalayan mountains and retiring in a cave, doing nothing. Even though that is oftentimes the misinterpretation of renunciation. Our renunciation is much more in renouncing our expectations of our actions. Do not renounce the effort, but renounce all expectations from that effort. not renounce our actions, but renounce all desire for the fruits of those actions, the self-involvement in our actions. Just act, which is, in 2 words, so much easier said than done. It is like if cultivating and developing the intellect, the capacity to discern, the capacity to see the end in the beginning, if that's like a muscle, getting to a place where you can just act without thoughts on how it's going to play out for you. That's like bench pressing 400 pounds. If cultivating the intellect is like building a muscle, getting to that point where you can just act. There's a great music video floating around right now from Arcade Fire, one of the best bands of the last 30 years. And in the music video for Year of the Snake, great song, by the way, phenomenal song, and a lot of philosophy woven within the lyrics of that song. Within that video, they're driving a truck around that says, "Don't think, trust." That's one hell of a Vedantic phrase, don't think, trust. But that is like bench pressing 400 pounds. Doable. In fact, we're all called to get to that state. Not thinking and just acting. Not thinking and just trusting. Of not thinking about how it's going to play out for us, how it's going to affect us, or what we might get on the other side of our actions. It is doable, but you wouldn't go to the gym for the first, second, or fifth session and toss 400 pounds on the bar and expect to be able to lift it. Part of the way to get to a place where you can renounce the expectations and be pleasantly surprised. But if we keep going to the gym, renouncing the expectations, we eventually get there. That is the hallmark of any path, any great path that humans have trekked, is along the way forgetting about the results, honing in, obsessing, focusing on the process, the action, the effort. Especially when you combine this with your Swadharma, which we touched on in an episode previously, maybe 4 or 5 days ago, where you align your nature, your inner nature, with the outer nature around you, and your effort feels almost effortless. You can't not do it. Spend 4 hours shooting 3-pointers because you just can't stop. You surrender into being an amazing, nurturing individual. You become a great elementary school teacher because it's your nature. Become a great parent. You become a great business leader because it's your nature. The effort almost just, it's like the surfer, 2 or 3 paddles, and boom, they're on the wave. The wave that they know how to ride, that they're wired for, that they leveled up, they saw this is the right wave for me, and they're just gliding. There is effort, and yet it looks effortless. And this philosophy makes the distinction of don't renounce the effort. Don't renounce the action. Go through the action while cultivating renunciation, and renounce the expectations. Reduce them down to rubble, reduce them down to nearly nothing. And according to that formula we mentioned, it's pure bliss. It's happiness everywhere you go. And what is the cost of great expectations? Well, according to that simple formula and according to this ancient philosophy, the cost of great expectations, the cost of that is our happiness. Before we end this, I know the question could be there, what do you do in a world where we expect things, good or bad? And that's where that first phrase that I mentioned becomes so valuable. Prepare for the worst. In Buddhism, There's a practice of envisioning death to become comfortable with it. Prepare for the worst. See where you'd be okay even in the worst circumstance. Don't suppress it. Don't run from it. Don't be so scared of it that you can't look in that direction. Prepare for it because the worst is going to happen. People around you that you love are going to cease. You will die. There will be tragedy. If it's not your home today, your home will have its own heartbreaking moments in the future. It is inevitable. It's written on the wall. It's not a surprise that some families go through, that some individuals experience. Everyone will experience these things. And it is childish, foolish, delusional of the grandest order to think that you won't. That is obviously where many people live and exist in their minds, convincing themselves that they won't go through such heartache. That is how they end up ill-prepared or completely unprepared when life happens to them. The life that you could have seen from 100 miles out that was going to happen to all of us. And tragedy becomes a cycle of tragedy, a downward spiral where it gets worse and worse and worse. That's for those that are unprepared, that haven't been preparing for life's challenges that are so obvious to see that we will all experience. But to expect them to happen tomorrow, to expect tragedy that happened halfway around the world to happen to us next week, that is pessimism. So even when it gets to life's challenges, expectation within this philosophy, within Tim Ferriss' equation of happiness, expectation has no place. When it comes to expectation, whether it is this philosophy or Tim Ferriss's pithy but pretty damn articulate formula, expectation has no place. It has no benefit. Preparation, yes. Effort, yes. Action, absolutely. But expectation, it's only cost. And if expectations get too high in work or a personal pursuit, in our spiritual approach, and anything and everything in between, if our expectations get too high, it can cost everything, negating all of the happiness that's sitting there with nearly any experience. If we could just renounce that temptation for expectation. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.